Hi there, Genki desu. In today's video, I want to give a quick review of the Final Fantasy 35th Anniversary Distant Worlds Music from Final Fantasy Chorale concert. I attended the concert on August 7th. It was an amazing concert with great music and loads of special guests. The main composer of the concert was Arnie Roth. He spoke in English through the whole concert, as the concert is going on a world tour around several different countries. Therefore, the main composer has to speak English. It was amusing seeing him speak English to crowds of hundreds and hundreds of Japanese people, but it was good for me since English is my first language. There were many special guests at the concert, including legendary Final Fantasy composer Nobuo Uematsu, who also took the stage to greet everyone. There were loads of cool merchandise at the show too, including this art book, including the concert book, t-shirts, CDs, vinyl, album, and more. There were so many great Final Fantasy fans, and loads of people wearing Final Fantasy Uniqlo t-shirts that were recently sold. I saw loads of Final Fantasy 15 t-shirts, loads of Final Fantasy 14 t-shirts, and loads of Final Fantasy 10 t-shirts. But altogether there were so many Final Fantasy fans. There were two parts to the concert. Part 1 and then an intermission, followed by Part 2. Part 1 consisted of music from Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 6, while Part 2 consisted of music from Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 15. It was an amazing experience, and the acoustics in the room were really good. You could really feel the emotion of the strings and percussion as well. The concert was performed by the New Japan Philharmonic Orchestra, and the choir was sung by a group called Bars Chorus. They appeared in part 2 of the program. All in all, it was an amazing show, full of great, moving and inspiring music. There were other guests there too. All the composers from the major Final Fantasy games were in attendance, and they had a shout out to each one of them. And at the end of the program, they all appeared and bowed on stage to the audience. It was amazing seeing so many legendary composers at the show. Of course, we had Nobuo Uematsu, who did the soundtracks for Final Fantasy 1 to 7. We had Naoshi Mizuta, who was the composer of Final Fantasy 11. We had Masayoshi Soken, who was the composer of Final Fantasy 14, and Yoko Shimomura, who was the composer of Final Fantasy 15. We also had Riki, who sang the Final Fantasy 10 song Steki Dane, and Emiko Shiratori, who sang the Final Fantasy 9 song Melodies of Life. These two singers performed live on stage. The Final Fantasy 10 song Steki Dane really made me tear up. Seeing Soken run up to the stage at the end was really funny. He did a little hop and skip as he bounced happily up to the stage from the seat in the audience. All the composers who worked on the Final Fantasy series followed up onto the stage and all gave a big bow to the audience at the end of the show. It was really moving. Now to the set list of the show, and shout outs to Audrey from Twitter for creating this list in English. You can follow her on Twitter at @aitaikimochi. So thanks Audrey for making this list. So part 1 started off with a medley of Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 3 songs. Whilst the music was being performed, in the back on the big screen they showed clips from Final Fantasy 1 to 3 of the characters wandering around in the main world. After that, the Final Fantasy 3 song Eternal Wind was performed. They also showed gameplay clips on the background screen. Then from Final Fantasy 4 we had the Red Wings Kingdom of Baron. Next we had Final Fantasy V, Home Sweet Home, and then from Final Fantasy VI we had the Phantom Forest, Phantom Train, and Kids Run Through the City. Then before the intermission we had an amazing medley of Final Fantasy 1 to 6 battle music. It was really amazing, full of so much energy and life. I really enjoyed it. All the music from the Final Fantasy 1 to 6 games was really great. Even though I don't have much experience playing most of these games, I could really appreciate the music. And some of the music still stands and is recognizable from the newer Final Fantasy games. After that, there was a 20-minute intermission where people could go to the restroom or go and buy some snacks. Then it was time for part 2, which really got me hyped, as most of the games I had played before are from Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 15, so I could really feel the emotion of the songs. I think the music is great on its own, but if you have a connection to these games, the music is really amplified and the emotions of the event are so much stronger. Part 2 left me tearing up on several occasions because of the music and how The acoustics really vibrated through the whole auditorium. It was a great experience. For part 2 started with the Final Fantasy VIII song Liberty Vitali, and then with the Final Fantasy XI song Ragnarok. Next was the Final Fantasy VII song Aeris Theme. This was the first time I began to tear up. On the screen they showed the scene of Cloud putting Aeris to rest as she returned to the live stream. It was very emotional and I couldn't help but tear up. Next was Final Fantasy XII song Flash of Steel, followed by Final Fantasy X song Steki Dane. For Steki Dane, the original singer Riki came on stage to perform the song. It was a really amazing and touching experience. On the screen they showed cutscenes from Final Fantasy X with Tidus and Yuna. It was really emotional and the performance by Riki was really amazing. Next we had Final Fantasy 15 song Apocalypse Noctis, which was really great, and you could really feel the music of Yoko Shimomura. Next was Final Fantasy 13 song Blinded by Light. I was a big Final Fantasy 13 fan, so this song was really hype and energetic. After that we had the performance of Melodies of Life by Emiko Shiratori. It was a very nice and touching song, while they showed Final Fantasy 9 cutscenes on the screen in the back. And after that was Final Fantasy 14 song Torn from the Heavens. You can really feel the music of Soken and the energy of the song. It was great. Then lastly, they had the Final Fantasy main theme as the credits for the people involved in the concert rolled in the background over the Final Fantasy 1 opening title screen. It was really amazing. And that was the end of the show, or so we thought. They do that usual thing that they do in concerts, where you think it's over, everyone claps, the composer walks off, but then seconds later he returns back to the stage for an encore. And for the encore at this show we had 2 songs extra. First was Zanarkand from Final Fantasy X by Nobuo Uematsu. It was really nice and touching song. And then it happened again. The composer walked off stage and then seconds later comes back on stage for a second encore. And this was one of the best songs in the show. Of course it was One Winged Angel from Final Fantasy VII, the legendary Sephiroth song. Sephiroth! It was a great and powerful performance, fantastic way to end the show. All in all, it was an amazing show and I would recommend it for any Final Fantasy fan. They are currently doing a world tour with several locations around the world. So if the tour is coming to a city near you, I definitely recommend you book some tickets and go. The composer Arnie Roth has had great character and gave great energy to the show in the way he composed the music. It was an amazing show. At the end, everyone was happy and left teary-eyed and emotional. In all, it was a great show, and I definitely recommend it to any Final Fantasy fans. Such amazing and touching music from throughout the amazing Final Fantasy series as it celebrates its 35th anniversary in 2022. Thanks for watching this video. Please comment if you have any questions, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks. Jane. Ciao.